A very, very warm welcome to our podcast, brought to you by Michael Glanville Executive Coaching. And today, as I always say, I have the absolute privilege of meeting this guy, Mike Wimbridge, from the world's largest sailing yacht insurer, so I understand, Mike. So that's
Thank
incredible. So welcome to the show.
Appreciate you, the invite. Thank you.
It's really lovely to have you here. Let's start off with something not marine related for a second. You are a bit of a sports fan, I understand, particularly football. Tell us about that. How did you get into that?
Yeah, very much so. And I go back through thin and thin. I was a long-time West Ham United fan, so got used to, unfortunately, disappointment for many, many years. But when I stopped playing local rugby, I came out and I wanted to just get involved with a local club. And I live in Eastleigh, and Eastleigh Football Club were a Wessex League team back then, with trees around the pitch and literally 100 men and a dog type vibe. So, and that rather appealed to me. So I started going there with my friend 20 plus years ago. The club's moved on massively. I still go. I'm still heavily involved. I'm an associate director down there, and then now in the National League. Still not winning as many as I would like, but you know, it's a release from the day job, and it's just, I think it's great to be part of something that's in your community. Too many things for me these days are remote, and there's huge benefits in all of that. But actually, just going down there, the grassroots vibe as well, I think it's just really fits me very nicely.
That's brilliant. And do they do young people in sport down there as well? So, you know, is there various different teams and mixed teams, or is it just a?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a thriving academy. So we have three years of scholars, so they can go to. It's working with Eastleigh College.
Yeah.
So they get the young kids in, boys and girls, bring them through the education side of things, also the football. Obviously, ultimately, with a view to them coming into the higher levels within the club and other clubs. So there's an awful lot of players that have come through that now playing on the local scene. So yeah, very, very vibrant.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, and so, I mean, insurance is a massive topic, and I've got various questions for you, sort of about
Not
insurance in general.
No,
well, I don't know. Should have pre-planned this, shouldn't we? But I mean, how did you originally get into insurance? What sort of, did you wake up one morning and say, right, I want to be in insurance?
Right. Well, I'm going to say, fortunately, no.
Okay.
And actually, I think I may have met one individual in my lifetime of this career and travel that did that. I would say I think I fit the blueprint of many people who just stumbled into it. I was a young man, came out of Eastleigh College myself, applied for lots and lots of jobs. Fortunately for me at the time, dear old Royal Insurance were on a recruitment drive in Southampton. So I went and applied, and I got the job with many, many others, actually good friends of mine that I still keep in contact with. In fact, Simon Headley, who I work with, we both worked together back in the 80s. So I stumbled into that. It was commercial, that sort of insurance, so small businesses, pubs, that sort of thing. And I actually took the job a week before the classic Michael Fish, there's not going to be a hurricane, madam. So here I was, a young man with lots of peers going into insurance, and that very first week, right, there's a bank of desks, there's a pen, there's a bit of paper. At 9 o'clock, those phones are going to open, and we had all the claims literally flooding in. So a baptism of wind, fire, rain, you name it, got me into that. And then actually, and this is where life takes a random turn. So my father, a lifelong soldier, military man, decided to come out of the army. He was part of Royal Corps of Transport, so that was his thing. And he decided to get his own little tipper lorry, driving tarmac out of Botley here in near Southampton. Went to a local insurance broker and said, "Oh, my lad's in insurance." And the guy said, "Oh, well, tell him to come and see me. I might have a job." So I scuttled up the road, and there was a company called Radcliffe and Company that latterly turned into Fastnet Marine, which is still a thriving business. And I got the job. And I did 4 years of for me, probably life and career defining work with and a great company, great people, some real characters, which and they taught me a lot about life in general as well as that. But I remember a classic that when I started, it was still letters, memos were coming in, and bless them, at the time there was a backlog. So I thought, well, I'll stack all of these things up And I always joke now, the pile, it's a bit like when you go fishing, the pile gets bigger and bigger, the fish gets bigger and bigger in the telling. But, I piled all these things up and I thought, right, if I then pin together the chase ups, this pile that's here goes down to that. And that actually reflecting was sort of quite a seminal moment in that, managing sort of the workloads. I'd obviously gone into it. So, and I was fortunate enough, again, Radcliffe's was they focused more on the small boats. I then got the opportunity to join a company called Bowring, which was an extremely well-known and respected name at the time. They subsequently became Marsh, which is now, if not the world's biggest insurance broker,
enormous firm,
certainly top 2 or 3. And I did 14 great years with those guys too. So, and I've still got good friends within that sort of environment. So, and that was my introduction to the super yacht world. Or Marsh were at the time probably the premier super yacht insurance broker. So we worked closely from here in Southampton with our London team and also our office in Fort Lauderdale. So it opened my eyes to this real global opportunity. And 14 great years developing friends, contacts, and starting to travel. So, we've spoken before about my idea that insurance is quite a dull subject, and I'm thinking, wow, I'm starting to travel to the US and do all these things. And one of my throwaway anecdotes is that I've got friends on every continent. For someone who works in insurance, I just still think that's quite amazing.
Yeah,
so,
it is, yeah.
So, 14 great years with them. Got the opportunity then to move to London with a company called AIG, another huge entity. Having said I probably wouldn't work for the Americans again, I went and did so. Super time again with those guys. Much more of an introduction on the underwriting side to the London market, how that worked. And that then, again, pure good fortune. A good friend of mine was moving from one syndicate to another, asked me to come and be his assistant at Brit Syndicate, which was amazing. My first, job sat in the seat in Lloyd's, which many of your listeners would have heard of, Lloyd's of London.
Yeah.
In a practical sense, a very big open marketplace where people come in and buy if you go to a normal market, you're buying apples from this person, that sort of stuff. The insurance market in Lloyd's works in a similar way, i.e. they would come to me for insurance on a yacht, I'd write a piece of it and they'd go to someone else and do all those things. And I did a number of years with Brit, again, learned a lot, started to develop those contacts. Then got the call to go and work for a company called Markel, another US entity. And that was as their main yacht underwriter. So in the Lloyd's sense, in my own personal sense, the pinnacle of where I was going within that setup. So I lovingly call it the big boy chair. I probably should call it the big person chair these days. But it was the ultimate responsibility of being sat there and managing that. And again, I had a great time with that, developed contacts with those guys. And they were responsible for me ultimately traveling to Australia and Singapore and Thailand and places like that because we had facilities. And 7 years ago, I got the opportunity to come and work for Pantaenius. So that was essentially as a global role and more of an overseas focusing on things. Within a year or so, the scope came in to take over running the UK office, which I do now. In fact, we have 2 offices in the UK. So, but still with that international leaning, looking more at the bigger yachts and just developing some of those markets and just our progression forward from where we started to where we are now.
Amazing. What a fantastic journey. And so super yacht, insurance in general, I think is incredibly interesting. The whole principle of it, no one likes paying it, but the whole principle of, you have a relatively modest annual fee, but the payouts could be absolutely enormous. And the calculations around that, the underwriting, the understanding of how the insurer is able to make a profit, because that's what we're in business to do at the end of the day. That must be incredibly challenging, the commercials around the insurance market.
Yeah, it's extremely involved, and this, now I think is the territory of the actuary. I think the actuary is as important. I mean, if I go back to my Lloyd's time, and Lloyd's had certain reputations in the 80s and 90s, but the more entrepreneurial side of business, in that the relationships with the insurance brokers was so strong that actually you weren't necessarily looking at just the piece of business in front of you. You were looking at their portfolio, your portfolio. And actually, some of those risks on paper, on email, as it may be now, were less appealing than others. But actually the more holistic viewpoint, and I think that's where Lloyd's at that time had that key advantage, that it was a marketplace and those brokers knew they maybe needed help on this one, but they'd given you some really good ones, or there's some other good ones to come, and you could take a bit of a viewpoint on it. And I think that where, maybe this is just a sign of my age, but I think where things are becoming much more almost formalized and regulated to such a high level, that entrepreneurial side of things by definition is being squeezed.
Yeah.
So actually, if you've got a relationship with someone who's providing a good or a service to you, and they know some of them are less appealing for them, but the other things are, they can do that. And I think that sometimes is difficult to understand. I mean, just in terms of those big super yachts, we may now have the $1 billion value. I don't know. I guess so. I certainly got involved in a couple that were 800, 850 million.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. I mean, that's a sizable investment for the owner.
Oh, massively.
And a lot of protection risk for you. It's all about risk management, isn't it?
Risk management, I think, is the key. That certainly was the buzzword, and still is. And for the clients that have vessels at that sort of value, it's not just a one-off. They've got fleets of them, and many of them own many sports teams, and some own countries. So you get all that reputational side that starts to bring in, and you find yourself sometimes in not a political position in terms of your own viewpoints, but actually political, because you know who the client is, what that might look like, and you sort of work all that stuff in. So yeah, it's not just finger in the air, I'll charge them £10, £100, whatever it is, but actually, funny enough, just focusing on that. And if you put that in context, and a good friend of mine, he came up with this phrase, not me, when there's pressure on insurance premiums, which most insurers are providing very good cover, 365 with expert people in the group offering claims support, those sorts of things, you can often find that if you're budgeting, the insurance premium will sit below flowers on board the yacht, or golf balls that they smack off and you just, sometimes that's quite difficult to rationalize. And there were certain, every market has cycles. I remember vividly when there was pressure on the rating in London, and you're just thinking we're almost racing to the bottom here to provide the cover as cheap as possible to probably the richest 0.001% of people on the planet. Something doesn't quite add up there. But again, part of the conversation, and things do move around. So.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? So presumably then you are evaluating and underwriting the owner as much as you are the asset. And so therefore you need to know who they are. You don't always go through intermediaries. And that's got to be really interesting.
Oh, yeah, very much so. And actually, for me, some of the unique things are where you get the chance to speak to someone, and they're quite unassuming people. They're just regular folks. And a really good example of that, many moons ago, I used to work in where we were selling insurance for people who chartered boats. So essentially top end travel insurance. So you charter the boat for $500,000 a week, and you'd insure it if you couldn't go, and all that stuff. And I remember speaking to one guy who'd done 2 or 3 of these, and I just thought, well, I'm going to ask this question, because as a regular person, to comprehend someone spending $500,000 on a week's holiday is quite a big. Now, even now, and this was probably maybe changed from 20 years ago. And I spoke to this chap, an American guy. I got in with him really, really well. And I just said to him, I said, how'd you get to this point? Because again, my thought very much is that to get to that level, probably just if you look at any regular domestic situation, the house is probably right. The kids' schools have got to be right. The cars, before we get to this level, someone's not thinking, oh, I've won a few quid, I'm going to go and now spend all this. So anyway, I spoke to this fellow, and he said, oh, I was very lucky. He said, one day McDonald's just wanted to buy my chickens for their McNuggets. And this chap was a poultry farmer in the US, I dare say, quite a big poultry farmer, got the McDonald's contract. It all just went kaboom.
Wow.
And there we go. And
just shows you, actually.
just these random little things, I can, when we're off air, quote many sort of people that have, again, on that charter cancellation, another random example is we were arranging it we all had to sign an NDA because this individual was going to propose to his then fiance, and this was a honeymoon after he'd written a score for a Disney film. So it was quite exciting to know that when you saw it in the paper, you thought, yeah, I knew
all about that. Yeah. I was in the know.
Yeah, exactly. And it's that doesn't happen too often, but yeah, it's good. I mean, again, one of the great joys for me, and certainly what I try and do now is it's all about visibility. I go back to that insurance as a subject can be a bit dull, but actually if we can be in the community, engaging with people, and that's led me to come on board the yacht and have a drink and do all those sorts of things. And just, I will give one random example. I happened to be on a yacht. The company I worked with had chartered part of this yacht for this boat show at Jolly Grand, very lovely. And I'd come back one day and just went to the little salon, the little bar on board, and just had a bottle of beer. And there was a gentleman sat down there, and we just got chatting about various things. Another American individual, actually. And I just said, what brings you here? One of those random throwaways. And he said, we just brought the yacht down for this rendezvous. And he said, it's next door. So I literally leant forward, looked over his shoulder, and on the back of the yacht was a helicopter emblazoned with the American football team that he owned. So it suddenly dawned on me that, wow, I know who you are, and I now know that you own this team, that team. And there was a moment of, but actually a charming individual. We just chatted for a while.
And people are just people, aren't they?
Exactly that. The last thing he probably wanted me to say how good I thought the team was or wasn't. We just had a chin. I actually tried, I have to say, to get him to buy Eastleigh Football Club, but I think he was having some labour disputes with some of the players at the time, and he said, "I've got far too many headaches." But
enough to worry about.
Yeah, you never know. Had to try and punt it.
That's an amazing story. So it's really interesting that you sort of found him to talk to, and actually it reminds me, of the lessons that people should really think about when they're working with other people in business, because as I said, people buy from people, but they're also always working with people, and everybody is, in fact, from a sort of baseline perspective, the same. You sometimes see these images of, I don't know, 5 skeletons, and it says, lawyer, banker, millionaire. Everybody is exactly the same at the end of the beginning of your life. And so from a leadership point of view, do you think that, ability to be able to just talk to anybody and ask questions and listen to anybody and really understand how they work and how they tick is actually what helps you to be a great leader in your, what you do now?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I think that sometimes we're all governed, and we've all seen examples of this where we're afraid to ask those questions. I have always been and continue to be, if I went to a conference and someone said, and we need to check the ABCs against the XYZs, I would first of all go, excuse me, can you just tell me what the ABC is? They'd say, you go, okay, great, thanks. I don't care whether that makes me look maybe as if I should know it. And the amount of times people have gone, thank God you asked for that, because I had no clue. And I just think those basic things, it's just clarity of that message. And actually, I suppose the reverse of that is I now, when I'm talking to people, don't assume that they know everything about what I do. And there are things that you need to just spell out without wishing to suggest they're in any way not capable of understanding it, but just we all get involved in our own little worlds, however big that world, jolly exciting with all these boats, but actually lots of people don't know about that. So, and I think that, again, stealing everyone else's quotes, but when I remember when I first walked into some of the really big office buildings in London, which were great, but just speaking to the nice people on the door as you went in, the security guards, the reception people. And actually, there was one of my favourite little stories is when I worked at Brit, we moved from an office in Bishopsgate into the Cheese Grater, the Leadenhall building. And I just couldn't comprehend. I'd come from a little office in Southampton, and here we are in this iconic building. And we had a staff facilities on the 40th floor. So again, incredible view. And we had a pool table and a foosball table, which I thought was fantastic, because I'd invite the brokers round, we'd have a bite to eat, and then we'd have a few games and they loved it. And it was actually
social engagement.
Social engagement. Really, you're not in a pub being overheard, and I'm sure they did realise, but you've got them for an hour or two, and we got into a little tournament one day, and one of the gentlemen worked in the post room, an Italian guy. He was amazing at this, but I just thought, wow, we're all 4 people stood around this table. Doesn't matter who we are, we just happen to be playing a game together, and off we go, and those sorts of things. So yeah, I'm always very, very keen that people understand, or people try and remember that human level is really, really important. That if we say we're going to be there, let's be there on time and be respectful, whether that's in whatever scheme of things, a senior person or a junior person. We're all the same. I absolutely agree.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And so one of the things that we'd talked about before the show was that your leadership journey, your development journey has not always been rosy for you, as it isn't for most people. It's not a straight line. It's a bit all over the place. But you were talking about a particular thing that was in your mind around your time when you were underwriting at Lloyd's of London. Incredible place and an incredible place to work. But that was just before you sort of joined here. But let's get into that a little bit. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean that for me was and I'm extremely proud of that. Lloyd's is an amazing organisation, and it's got some great people in it. And they do some incredible things. They have the ability. And perhaps I should start with just pointing out to people, going back to the clarity, Lloyd's is a facilitator.
Yeah.
So Lloyd's owns the building, sets up the whole market. The individual companies effectively have their own little stalls. They're called boxes because that's the shape they used to be. So
hence the market.
Exactly, very much that market, and it's still very, very much like that. And that for me just meant that in the yacht world, and there weren't many, there probably still aren't, but let's say 10 people doing that sort of thing, probably less. And to move from servicing that market as a broker to moving into working next to my colleague at Brit, to then coming into the main chair and being a leader within that marketplace was, it's a nice ego massage, don't get me wrong. It's lovely. And I absolutely hammed it up with the chalk stripe suits, and I bought myself some jolly nice pens to do the sort of thing. And
always helps.
Well, I think some of it is there was almost, I felt, a requirement to play the role.
Yeah. Okay.
So I've joked before that it felt a bit like getting on the stage, because you were in one sense an enormous responsibility, but in another sense an awful lot of power in terms of those transactions and strategy and those things, which I have to say I lapped that up. I really, really enjoyed it. And I would flatter myself that if you spoke to the brokers, they would also said they liked coming to see me. Yes, of course, we did the business and extremely serious around that, but we had some fun too. So, what was amazing for me at the time, going back to the sporting thing, was that I'd find on a Monday morning that people from literally all over the world were asking me how Eastleigh had got on at the weekend. So again, going back to that human side of things, but certainly with that, particularly the step up from being the number 2 person at one entity to stepping up into the main chair was actually quite daunting. I sort of read at the time about imposter syndrome and those sorts of things, and actually I definitely had a degree of that, because suddenly you're in a position where, and maybe it's changed now post-COVID with the development of Teams and Zoom and all those fine things, but actually I would have in a morning a queue of brokers queuing with files to talk to me about, and it was I was acutely aware that they were fully expecting me to understand it, to do it, and ultimately put the stamp down if we needed, and to just be in that moment, or not quite the deer in the headlights, but just be in that moment where the buck absolutely stops with you. There's yes, there were people I could talk to around the business, of course, higher, lower, whatever, but no one in that business had more knowledge on this particular product than I did. That's why I was there. So there was, a few times I'd sort of come home and talk to my wife about, wow, I've just done this and I've just done that. And there was a moment where you just needed to take a breath. This is what you're employed to. This is what you can do.
Yeah.
And go for it. But it's quite something when you have, I mentioned to you, a $50 million limit, and that could be put down multiple times a day. And that, that's still a vast number. This was 2016 when I started doing that, and actually, so nearly 10 years ago. You could buy a small block of flats for that sort of money, maybe a big block of flats, and there was just a moment or two where you think, wow, this is really really big stuff. So, but you thrive with it, or you don't. I again flatter myself. Hopefully I did, and it then gave me the springboard to go, right, I've done that. What's next?
Yeah, what can I do next? Yeah, no, it's fascinating. And so you must have built, over that period, you must have built so much confidence that that the imposter syndrome element just started to dissipate naturally. Was there anybody that sort of helped you on that journey, that, I mean, you don't need to name names, but that you felt was around you, supporting you, always giving you a little bit of guidance and a little bit of support, people that helped you along the way?
Yeah, absolutely. And I from my case, the first people I think about is my wife and daughter. 100% that we talk about these sorts of things, and there was and it's sort of a huge amount of support and empathy and understanding. My wife worked in insurance for some years, so that absolutely helped. But a reassurance, and also sometimes, gosh, you're doing that, and it's only you, it's only Dad, or it's this, and actually sometimes, do you know what? Yeah, it is. It's I sometimes see things in real life and dramas on TV where you might have a brain surgeon, or you might see. I watched something recently, a police drama, and wow, there'd been a road accident and someone had been shot and all those things, and that's really we're nowhere near that. So I think just trying to rationalise that, yes, this is insurance, yes, it's massively important, but actually it isn't life or death in that true sense. And also, I looked around at the market both in the UK and abroad, and actually these are my peers and friends also doing this. And I know they do it. And there was one underwriter that worked for I suppose a competitor, but a mutual. We did things together. And actually he and I would quite often go and have a coffee and just not talk about individual risks or anything, but maybe a broker, or maybe just life in general. And actually it's really reassuring going from that moment of, gosh, it's all down to me, to actually, no, it isn't. I can talk to people, who might not necessarily understand specifically what I'm doing, but actually understand what's happening. I was also very lucky at the time that I commuted here from Southampton up to London, and I met and I'm still in touch with a number of really good friends who we just sat together on the train. And as you can hopefully tell today, I'm quite happy to have a chat with most people. And I'm not one for burying my head in watching a TV show or reading a book, and so I quite liked just doing that. And there's one chap worked for Capital Radio, one did computer games, one worked for the MOD, and actually we shared lots of good times, laughing and joking. There were times where the railway didn't work as well as we'd have hoped, so it's almost you're sort of sharing a bit of that pain too. And more than one occasion, all jumping into a taxi when the trains kicked us off somewhere on the journey, and we all head home. But just, I think that little camaraderie is really important. And actually, I suppose that leads me on to thinking about how the world has changed and all the huge developments with online, with virtual, which is great. But I would have missed all of that stuff. And I can't help but wonder that unless we're very careful, people will miss that bond, and as I say, I'm pro technology. It's great for me. Most of my team are in Plymouth. My boss is in Hamburg, as are some of my senior colleagues. At the press of a button, I'm talking to them, and I wouldn't be if I had to jump on a plane and do that. But just getting those bits around the edges, those nuances, again, those human emotions are quite difficult. I mean, I do find it funny still when I bump into people and you think, oh, you're quite a lot taller or shorter than I thought you might be, because I've only seen you in that box
on the screen.
And you sort of think, well, I've known you for 2 years. How strange, but I've just met you. So I think, that's something that we probably ought to look at. And for me, that's as much as the leaders in businesses to try and embrace that side of things, as well as the new folks coming in.
Yeah, interesting. And all markets, and you touched on it there, all markets are changing, not just being driven by technology, but insurance particularly, and in your sector, there are a number of things happening, changes in weather patterns and weather cycles. There's been some major incidents, both, fires and, other incidents particularly in the super yacht market.
Absolutely.
That's influencing underwriting. There is the development of lithium batteries, and more of that being used, and it's the same in the car insurance industry.
Yeah, sure.
What do you think is the sort of, out of those, the biggest challenge that the industry as a whole is facing in terms of understanding what they can insure and where their limits are, where their risk limits are?
Yeah, again, really good question and quite a broad question. What I would actually say that there's one thing you didn't mention there, which springs to mind straight away, is the political situation of the world. Most people will be aware of what happened with the Russian interests. You've only got to be a football fan and look at what happened with Chelsea and Mr. Abramovich having to step away and all those things. Many of those Russians owned super yachts, so that had a huge impact, and that situation hasn't really changed. Unfortunately, there's unrest in some fairly key areas. If we think about commercial shipping rather than the pleasure yacht side at the moment, transits through the Gulf are still questionable. That just means our goods take longer to get here and probably cost more to get here than from the Far East and places like that. And in our sense, we have a lot of owners, as to my competitors, that they just don't want to take the boat to the Med anymore. They've been for the last 10 years. They want to go to Alaska. They want to go through down to the Indian Ocean and all those things. So I just think that's, even if it's only, there's a tiny bit more consideration needs to be given to those plans. Whereas, I'm putting myself in their shoes, that if I own this super yacht and I want it to be there next week, I have people that will get it to there, and it's just a matter of time and pricing essentially. But I think, again, bringing in those elements that you talk about, they impact right from the yachts we have out of the window behind us right up to the biggest ones on the planet. And I just think that we need to be aware as a market, certainly we do it here, where we're not just insurance providers. We're giving information about weather. We're giving information about what you need to do with your yacht in the winter time, if you've got lithium, if you've got X, Y, and Z. And I just think that it's much more, the insurance industry for me has morphed into not just a provider of that risk transfer mechanism, but actually something that's bigger than that. It's advice. It's cheesy commentary, but the trusted advisor level, which I think we all aspire to get to, and hopefully we achieve. But as a customer, certainly I think as the value of those assets increase, I think whether there's a correlation between the time poorness, and that's probably not the right phrase, but the value of that leisure time, you could argue gets more paramount. I mean, I reflect on my life and the things I do, and sometimes I'm quite time poor, and you have to make decisions and compromises on things you do or don't do. And I would imagine that if you're at that level, you've probably earmarked 2-3 weeks in August, for example, when you want to be on the boat, and almost there your red lines. Because I think if we go again back to those human side of things, the husband, wife, kids, that's the holiday, and you don't mess around with that one, and the other noise needs to go away. So I think there's challenges around that side of things. There's one really key area is the environmental aspect. We look at yachts, super yachts particularly, that don't have the greatest reputation. There's huge work going on around building, around fuels, around all those sorts of things, but it's a tricky subject. But actually just understanding, again, as an insurance provider, that we need to do everything we can so that we mitigate our own environmental impacts. And we look, for example, we had a previous little motorboat here that we put full bio-friendly anti-foul on. Worked really well. We did some work around that, shared that information, just to make clients think about, there's another way. Yes, it may cost me £1 or £2 more per can, but actually it makes some sense. And I think just promoting that. Interesting you mentioned about lithium batteries, because anyone who knows me knows I've been involved in some fairly regular discussions around that side of things. And I think sometimes lithium and the marine side gets a bad rap. There are lots of professionals, lots of boat builders fitting lithium, fitting it entirely appropriately. It isn't new technology. most of us have got a lithium battery in our pockets with the phones, but many of us will have a domestic drill at home or a garden strimmer, all lithium.
Yeah.
And in most cases, trouble free. One of the areas that we worked on with some other insurers actually in the UK and British Marine, I should absolutely credit them. It's just a sort of 10-point guide about what to do with lithium batteries on board. And actually, it's not rocket science. It's use the adapter that you bought with it, read the instructions, don't leave it when you get off the boat and all those sorts of things. And we're probably all a little guilty of, we want the new toy out of the box and we don't really read it. And, if I know there have been some fairly high profile fires, some of which, yes, linked to lithium, but that, from the information I've gleaned, is these things have just not been charging properly, but they've continued to charge them, and unfortunately things have gone terribly wrong. So that for me just comes back to those basic points, that use the things properly. If they're not charging, do something about it. I don't just put them in the cupboard and hope it goes away. I did speak to one gentleman some years ago at Southampton Boat Show where they had a battery they knew was troublesome. They just put it in the cupboard, and 3 weeks later the boat burnt down. If they'd taken it ashore and given it back, but the charter itinerary didn't work or something, so they just unplugged it. And I think it's just understanding that a lithium battery is different to a car battery. They work in a different way, and I'm not pretending to be an expert, but just that basic information. I think that's where all insurers have got the opportunity, because people listen to what the insurer says. Yes, we might not be experts, but actually, look, here's some information provided to us by experts that will make your life safer. One of my good friends is a fire investigator, and we were talking around, why would people do this? Why would they have these poor procedures? And he said, look, here's a really good example. He said, if you said to the yacht owner, oh, here's the lazarette, here's the garage where you put these things, but by the way, there's just a bucket full of petrol that we just leave there randomly. Every owner would go, well, I'm not happy with that. Potentially some of these things are equivalent to that level of danger, and you suddenly think, wow, that's actually a really easy way to explain it. So
the education's really key
most people wouldn't want to put themselves or their friends and family in danger, and sometimes these poor practices can lead to more dangerous situations.
I think that's there's loads of points you picked up there, but one of the things that I think is really interesting is from an insurance perspective, looking at the customer education side, but also the ESG side, the environmental impact. And I suppose before this interview, it probably didn't cross my mind that there's such a wide reach in the thought process of this type of business. And I think that's great, and it's great for customers. I mean, you picked up earlier, the customer relationship element is what will keep people in business. And obviously with the development of AI, I mean, presumably AI underwriting is something that is going on in the background, but do you think that's going to become more of an impact, or is it you still got that really important human relationship element?
So I think absolutely it's being used, and absolutely it's going to be more prevalent. And there are, without being too dull about it, there are certain types of insurance that are more easily commoditizable. Car insurance, home insurance, for you. So the data available about the number of types of cars, that is huge. So why wouldn't people use a facility that does that, and actually could potentially be quite a lot more accurate than if it was all being done by hand? I always think, and whether it's just my own personal prejudice, if you like, or just because I've been doing this for 30 plus years, I think boats are different. I think that the average boat owner treats the boat as something very different. The house and the car, I just need insurance, so I do it. Most people that have got a vested interest in the boat, and I think that actually, again, the higher or the further you go up, not necessarily just in size, but if we had a customer, and someone could have gone to Southampton Boat Show last week, two people, one's bought a boat at £200,000 or £300,000, they're going to keep it here, they're going to go to the Isle of Wight for their lunch occasionally, and then they'll come back. The very next person could have bought exactly the same boat, but they're planning the worldwide trip.
And that changes the profile
entirely. And I just
entirely.
think that, and it doesn't just change. The boat's the same. Yes, okay, the premiums like to be more because they're going further afield and it costs more to do claims from further afield. But actually, you're then looking at, well, this person's only been sailing for a year, but it doesn't matter. They're going to the Isle of Wight. It can be a bit more relaxed. This person's heading to Polynesia. We need to just look at it differently. And I think if you magnify that out in currently, I think there are too many variables. I dare say all the models and algorithms will start to bring that in. Where my personal thought, and I think the thought of our business, is that AI is a complementary facility. We've talked about it actually on the UK management level and at the board level in the group. There are certain functions where we can put items through an AI model and it can provide, for example, a synopsis, a short bullet point. And for me, that's almost triaging. So if we had, let's pick an example, a survey report on a boat. If we anonymize it, push it through with the question, read this, tell me if there's any issues, essentially. And if it came with 3 or 4 bullet points, surveyors looked at it, boat's in good condition, no issues, that can then go to a staff member with a degree of confidence that it's been triaged. If there are 2 or 3 highlights, well, we'd follow up on that. Or it could be, this boat's dreadful, blah, blah, blah. And that just speeds up that process a little bit. We wouldn't ever, I don't think, currently rely on that as a one-stop solution. I don't think that's appropriate, but I just think it can help with some of those things. I'll give you a live example. I got sent recently a strategy document for a Freeport area. And I thought, oh gosh, that's 50 pages, 100 pages, whatever it was. Popped it through a system and said, give me the bullets. And the bullets were great. This is what they want to do. This is when they want to do it. And I said, oh, what is the impact for this office or our other office, whichever it was? And it gave me a few things. And that was, for me at the time, that was enough information to go, okay, I do need to keep an eye on this, or I don't, whichever it was, I can't remember. And I think that's where AI can come through. But certainly on those higher volume and those more transaction, I can absolutely see it.
Right. And you've been running 2 centre offices in the UK, obviously running a team. I know you value your team, massively. But a question that I always ask my guests when we do the podcast is, what's been your highest leadership high and what's been your lowest leadership point, I suppose. And it may not be in the current circumstances, but thinking about your career journey, what would you say was your highest leadership high, the thing that you remember the most?
Yeah, so actually I do think that is where I am now, because this, when I started, the office was in Plymouth doing a super job. Many of the people have been there now up to 30 years. To actually integrate that with this office here, and also maybe reintegrate us with the group level, just providing that link has been a good achievement, a really positive achievement. What I would say though, again, and I keep talking about this human level, is I felt I'd inherited a business that didn't have too much progression set out. Whether that was strictly true or not, I couldn't see it. And the key for me is empowerment of those individuals. Now, it took me a while to understand that in any business, not everybody wants to be in charge. Some people don't, and there's nothing wrong with that. And that was a slight mindset change for me, because I've always, I can do that, and then almost, oh God, how do I do that when it comes your way? And I know some people aren't, but actually just to see some of my colleagues who did want to do that and are now in a more structured environment with next steps open to them. And I suppose also as well, more importantly for me, is backfilling those roles so that the next person in line can aspire to be doing that.
Succession plan,
yeah. And also, I think, as importantly, not everyone stays. We're not in the 60s and 70s anymore, where you joined Ford's at Dagenham and you stayed there until you left. I think it's really important that we give the people the opportunity, but we actually are addressing the fact that, going back to the SWOT analysis, there are some threats if people, this is a small business, if people get poached and all that sort of stuff. But actually, and I think that's, in my simplistic way, I wanted to fill the vacancies from the bottom, because I think we invest time, we invest money, and all those sorts of things in bringing those folks along on that journey and helping them mold to what we want to be. We are a unique organisation, as is every other organisation, and those little nuances I think are quite important. But just empowering. Yeah, we did a staff survey a year or two ago, and it was who would you like to swap with for the day? And I was very flattered that quite a few people said I would quite like his job for a day or a week. I did think sometimes careful what you wish for, but actually that was good. And you know, without sounding pompous, and I really don't mean to be, I don't ever feel threatened by people coming through. I see it, you know, and I've made it very clear that those that want to get on, I will do everything in my power to make that happen. I flatter myself I'm quite good at this and I know what I'm doing, but I don't want to do it forever. And I think it's you know, as you click over, in my case, click over 50, click over 55, we're closer to hanging the boots up than making the debut. And I think it's important to understand that, look, what does that journey look like for me? What does it look like for the business? And more importantly, what does it look like for the person coming through that? And I think we all like the idea of handing the reins over to someone that we trust and you know, we've nurtured, if you like. So, you know, I think as a general viewpoint, that's probably the high. The low definitely, and you know, we all have worked with some more difficult people over the years. I reflect on some time in London that was a bit awkward, where I felt I knew the business really well. This person didn't quite understand the yacht side, but they were senior, I wasn't. And also sometimes where, you know, you do stuff for the staff and it just doesn't get, it's taken in a different context than it's meant, and I think that's just human nature, and you know, that's probably happened in a few times. And I go back to when I was at the Royal and life was very difficult, and one day one of the section leaders or whatever brought in some sweets or some donuts or something, and I remember thinking, God, that doesn't paper over these cracks, does it? And I thought, no, actually park that thought. This is a human thinking. It's been a bit rough this week. Have a donut on me type thing. And it wasn't a corporate thing, it was this. And I just thought then, yeah, you need to just, I suppose, take that breath. You know, we're all, or certainly I have been in the past, you know, too easy to fire that email off or to think about something. And I just thought, no, take a step back. And now I find myself in that position that if I did something like that, it would be, I think, an acknowledgement that, yeah, maybe this week or last week's been tough, but we are working towards that slightly greener grass. But yeah, you know, there's just something that, so I think, yeah, that's probably that lower side.
You talked there about succession planning and how important that is, and having people coming through the business, seeing them develop, and you know, that's is a wonderful thing for, you know, leaders and business owners to be able to be able to do, and fostering a culture of that kind of individual development. So thinking about that, or with that in your mind, what message would you give to people that are thinking of either getting into insurance or getting into the marine market, but also just thinking about the next step in their career? You know, whether they, as you say, some people don't want to, but whether they're thinking about stepping up into an MD or a leadership role, what message would you give them?
Yeah, well, I mean, quite simply, from my point of view, I'd be, if that's what you want to do, I'd grab it with both hands. It's you know, I always think about Richard Branson in this, because he's always been, I think, quite transparent in what he perceived as his limitations. And it was very much, yes, I'll do it. And then you learn where, and again, if I look at peers around the market and people I respect in public life as well, they haven't all gone into the role they've got now knowing fully how to do it. And I go back to that time where I moved from being an assistant into the number one position. I really sort of sat myself down and said, right, they've employed you because of who you are. Don't suddenly change into somebody that you think they want. They've looked at you and said, right, please come and work for us. And I would say the same to anyone if they're looking to make that next step, is if you are lucky enough to be approached or you approach somebody else, just be genuine, because certainly where I look at, you know, some of the folks I look at within our organisation that I think can be the next leaders, and we're starting them on that process. I don't want another me. There couldn't be, for all, you know, the obvious reasons, but actually we should be embracing the differences and the different viewpoints they're bringing. And I think sometimes we're all so anxious to to fit what our own self-imposed idea of what this person wants or that person wants. And actually we do forget sometimes that actually it's the differences that are as important as the capabilities. So yes, I would absolutely encourage everyone to do it. In terms of coming into insurance, I can only speak from my own personal perspective. I've been lucky. I enjoy talking to people. I enjoy travel. I enjoy all those good things, deal making, that more entrepreneurial side of things. And this career has taken me all over the world and enabled me to do that. I don't see any reason why within certain roles that couldn't be available to someone else, should they choose to. Equally, if they want to come in and they don't want to do that, there are a huge number of roles within that too. So you know, I'm a major advocate for the insurance industry, not just for what it does in terms of that risk transfer side of things, but actually, in most cases, people I've met are quite social. You know, we all travel together, competitors, friends, and there's just that shared understanding of what we're doing and working together. And yeah, I think it's fantastic.
Brilliant messages. Thank you so much, Mike. It's always great meeting amazing leaders on their journey to success. You're now an amazing leader, and you were before, of course. But now that you've joined the podcast, you can have that accolade. If you are interested in watching any of our other podcasts, then they're available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So you can listen to them or you can watch them. We always love it if you watch us on YouTube. It's always good fun to have this couch type conversation. Absolutely brilliant to learn about the industry and to learn about you, Mike. So thank you so much. And for viewers and listeners, look forward to seeing you in the next podcast. Click our subscribe button, and we'll see you again very soon.